Video game series, am I right? Yeah. Everybody loves to have a reliable, ongoing series of games. Yeah, that sounds like a boring, nothing statement, but when you really think about it, it's actually an interesting concept. In a medium like film or television, people often scoff at constant sequels and spin-offs of pre-existing IP, but with video games, that sort of thing is an accepted and in fact beloved fixture of the industry. I guess that just comes down to how different the realm of interactive media is. With games, sequels aren't just about continuing or revisiting the same old story. It's about, well, the gameplay. Taking an interactive experience fans love and allowing those fans to experience even more of it, while also expanding upon the core concept, either by taking advantage of more powerful hardware, or by just adding a bunch of new, inventive twists. That's really what a video game sequel is all about, giving players a newer, bigger, and better take on what they already adore. But what if you gave them something completely different instead? I asked for Pokemon. Yes, every so often a video game series will switch to an entirely new genre. It's pretty common for a new entry in a long-running franchise to make fundamental changes to its formula in order to modernize or reinvigorate it. This is especially true with reboots, but usually those will still ultimately fall under the same basic category of game. Mortal Kombat is a fighting game. Second verse, same as the first. But when a series changes gears to a more extreme extent than that, that's far more rare and peculiar. Sometimes the developer or publisher feels that the old gameplay style is antiquated. Sometimes an IP changes hands and the new blood wants to do their own thing. And sometimes the devs are just feeling a little silly. In any case, I want to go through some notable cases of a video game series changing genres between entries, and analyze why that happened and if it worked out or not. By doing this, we should finally be able to answer if switching majors in senior year is a good idea or not. It is. Now, to get this out of the way, some people might consider the likes of Metroid Prime, Mega Man Legends, or even the 3D Mario games for this conversation. What a bunch of idiots! See, these games do exist in different genres than the franchises they branch off from, but that's exactly it. These aren't direct sequels, follow-ups, or replacements for their respective series. They're sub-series or spin-offs. Metroid Prime reimagined the classic side-scrolling Metroid formula as a 3D first-person shooter, but these two types of Metroid game were, and still are, being made at the same time. For the sake of this discussion, I'm only really looking at genre changes within a core series that were effectively meant to replace the original gameplay style. Though, I'm gonna break that rule ever so slightly with the first example, Star Fox Adventures, the most infamous entry in the Star Fox series. Well, one of. I'm pretty sure the story behind this thing is common knowledge by now. Rare, the studio behind Donkey Kong Country, Banjo-Kazooie, GoldenEye, and more, was originally developing the game as an original title for the N64, Dinosaur Planet. But when development moved on to the GameCube, Shigeru Miyamoto himself saw similarities between the game's characters and Fox McCloud. And because Nintendo wanted a Star Fox game on their new console, Rare was instructed to hastily turn Dinosaur Planet into one. As such, we have a Star Fox game that is nothing at all like a Star Fox game. It's more of a dungeon-crawling adventure game a la Zelda. Checks out. I've heard people say this game isn't too bad if you look at it as its own thing, but I don't know, man. Even then, I find it to be a pretty clunky Zelda clone at best. I'm not into this game in isolation, and the fact that they tried to package it as the next big Star Fox game certainly doesn't help. But hey, like I said, the team behind this project never intended to make a Star Fox game. That fate was thrust upon them. That being said, why does the title sound so familiar? Whoa! Younger people may not realize, but the first few Warcraft games were in the real-time strategy genre. The original Warcraft Orcs and Humans soon got a sequel and a threequel, all of which were RTSs. A point-and-click adventure game, Warcraft Adventures, was developed but scrapped in the midst of all of this. But the series would eventually get its big genre shift in the form of World of Warcraft, an MMORPG that you might have heard of. Warcraft has since gotten a handful of spin-offs, mobile games, and remasters, but aside from that, the MMO completely replaced the mainline series. It's easy to see why. This ain't no Star Fox Adventures. World of Warcraft ended up becoming one of the most successful and well-known games of all time. I've never been into WoW. Fuck that word. But as an outsider looking in, this seems to be a genre swap done right. Though, it's always surprised me that a series randomly having an MMO as a mainline entry isn't unheard of. Square Enix is no stranger to that phenomenon, with both Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy being given main numbered titles that are MMORPGs, rather than single-player RPGs. And God, Final Fantasy, now that's a series with some genre hopping under its belt. What once was a cornerstone of turn-based JRPGs is now more so associated with the action RPG subgenre. That may not sound like a huge leap, but these two things play nothing alike. Modern Final Fantasy almost feels closer to hack and slash games than old school turn-based combat. Not necessarily a bad thing, but my problem is in the motive. This change was made because Square Enix and the series developers felt that turn-based combat was becoming outdated and didn't fit in the modern game landscape. And boy howdy do I hate that. As a JRPG fan, it's already a headache dealing with dumbass gamers that insist that turn-based combat is just a relic of the past, and all games that use it should get with the times and change to something else. And having one of the biggest players in the game reaffirm that stupid belief is not helping. I hate that this needs to be said in the year of our Lord 2023, but turn-based combat isn't just a byproduct of archaic hardware. It's as valid a gameplay style as any other. You want to know the best part about that? Sega's Yakuza series essentially did the opposite, switching its combat from a beat-em-up style to turn-based for Yakuza 7. Guess what happened? Putting aside corporate politics and annoying people though, it'd be ridiculous to argue that either of these genre swaps haven't been successful. People will have their preferences with such vastly different gameplay styles obviously, but from an objective standpoint, these jumps were made gracefully. And you can't talk about graceful genre jumps without mentioning Castlevania. The first 10 or so games in that series were tough-as-nails platformers more than anything. The immediate sequel and threequel experimented with some RPG elements and non-linearity, but by and large, Castlevania was all about fighting and avoiding monsters and other obstacles on your way to the end of the stage. What a concept. But things really changed with Castlevania Symphony of the Night. With that game, not only did the devs want to ease up on challenge, so they wholeheartedly embraced RPG mechanics like level ups and equipment, but they also wanted the game to feel way bigger than the previous titles, so they implemented an open-ended exploration structure inspired by the Metroid series. That's an interesting idea. I wonder what people ended up calling it. Whoa. Listen, I don't need to tell you how well this went, but I will anyway. Symphony of the Night is a great game in its own right, and it pushed the Castlevania series forward in a way no one could have really expected, but that's not even half the story. The significance of the Metroidvania being more or less invented here speaks for itself. When you succeed in not only shifting to a new genre, but creating one that's still influential and iterated upon decades later, yeah, you did a good job there, Konami.
I can't believe I just said that!
A decent number of genre-hopping sequels have left their mark on the video game industry like that. Wolfenstein went from a 2D stealth game to the grandfather of first-person shooters. Grand Theft Auto shifted from a somewhat arcadey top-down title to a pioneer in 3D sandboxes. And Pac-Man transitioned from the face of retro gaming to... bad example, but... the point is, it's sometimes worth taking a risk like this, because by reinventing your own project, you may just end up changing the entire medium. Yeah, you knew it was coming. Banjo-Kazooie is one of my favorite games of all time. A pioneer of the 3D platformer collectathon genre that was popular during the N64 era. It took the basic groundwork of Super Mario 64 and innovated upon it to create such a unique experience. Vibrant, lived-in worlds to explore, imported collectibles around every corner, a plethora of abilities for traversal, combat, and puzzle solving, all tied together by the charming characterization and writing that are to be expected of Rare. It got a sequel, Banjo-Tooie, which has its flaws, but still gave players more of what they loved with the first game. Then, going into the next generation, Rare put out our old friend Star Fox Adventures, great, and then they got bought by Microsoft. Wow! F that word! And so, after some obscure spin-offs, we got the third main entry in the Banjo-Kazooie series, Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. You know, the car one. This plays nothing like the first two games. Sure, you're still collecting stuff, But at that point, every game's a Banjo game. You're not exploring the worlds for the collectibles, you're talking to NPCs to start missions. And you're not gaining and using a bunch of wacky moves, you're building vehicles to use in those missions. Like with Star Fox, this is an instance where people often say, if you ignore the fact that this is supposed to be Banjo, it's pretty good. And while I do agree with that more here, I still have issues with the game. The vehicle construction system is genuinely really cool and in-depth, and you're able to get super creative with how you can complete the missions. However, that aspect is actively hindered by a tiered reward system that incentivizes you to play optimally rather than creatively. Plus, a lot of missions force you into a pre-built vehicle, which defeats the purpose of the game's entire gimmick. On top of that, God, these worlds are barren. Again, you have to talk to NPCs to begin missions. Each stage is huge and is divided into a few acts for no real reason because the missions reload the environment anyway. And each act only has like 3 NPCs with missions on average. Basically, what this adds up to are levels that are huge, empty, and pointless. And beyond all that, no, I'm not going to ignore the fact that this isn't Banjo-Kazooie. See, the thing with Star Fox Adventures is, aside from it not even originally being a Star Fox game, its existence was ultimately harmless to the series. It came only a few short years after the previous entry, and it wouldn't be long before the series returned to a more traditional place. With Banjo, it had been 8 years since the previous game. The series' future was still in question due to the Microsoft acquisition, and 15 years later, a second verse, same as the first. Oh yeah, and they weren't doing themselves any favors by having characters poke fun at the original style and the fans who like it. I know that kind of snarky humor is par for the course with this series, but maybe don't rub it in players' faces that you're not giving them what they want. Just an idea. But hey, don't let that fool you. As much as genre hopping can be a tone-deaf decision that angers longtime fans and tanks a series, it could also be the very thing that creates new fans and reinvents not only that franchise, but the entire video game industry. After all, the examples I brought up here are just scratching the surface of both ends of the spectrum. And so I encourage you to tell me about other video game series that have changed to a new genre partway through, good and bad. Either way, I just find it to be an incredibly interesting phenomenon. As much as the gameplay style can define a series, a change in that department can be just as important to its identity and longevity, for better or for worse. If nothing else, I hope your takeaway is that video game series, am I right? Yeah. Whoa!